First off, I made a mistake. I know that's hard for some of y'all to believe, but Russ Cochran I called you instead of Russ Clayton.
That's okay.
But Russ is the one who collected a lot of the presidential things, and I'm not going to get on his turf because he's going to be doing Art for Lunch. It's next month, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep. So you'll want to come check that out. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the presidential material because he will be here. Okay, so looking first at the sketch wall. If you start on the far left, those are a series of 3 pieces that Mike Untee did when he was here during a workshop. He's an artist from Denver. To the right and a little lower, those should look familiar to you. Those are for the Redbird stage painting, which is in the gallery where the Redbird Stagecoach is by Fred Fellows. Above that is a big sketch for a painting by Gary Carter. And below that, a sketch for a painting color study done by Don Crowley for the Critics. That particular painting is not out, but most of the rest of these are, and you can go search them out in the galleries. Most of the ones on the rack were done for classes, as I told you about. The one there in the center by Carrie Fell, if you've ever seen any of her work, it kind of looks like it was done with finger paints or with hands-on, fingers in the paint. That's because that's exactly what she does. She squirts paint out of tubes and then moves it around with her hands a lot, and then she'll finish it up maybe with a brush or a palette knife or something. I took one of our member groups to her house one time, and she was doing a demo, and we had 2 other artists with us. They both were in the back just shaking their heads, and I went back and I said, "What's wrong, guys?" They said, "She's having too much fun to call herself an artist." A couple of pieces by Chanteau Begay, top left and in the dead center there. He's one of the Navajo artists that will be in our 6th Navajo Masters exhibition that we're opening next month, or 2 months from now in May. So we're looking forward to have him back. He's a wonderful artist. Right below the center one there, that drawing, that's a study for an Alfredo Rodriguez painting called Wind Beneath Their Wings. One of my favorites is the one lower right. That's the Kim Wiggins, which probably looks familiar to you if you know his work at all. And what he had the students do was follow along and paint the same thing he was painting. So they all were painting that same scene. And they were following along. And when they got to lunch, that's how far he had gotten. When they came back from lunch, he said, "Okay, y'all finish it." So his was half done. The rest of them went home with a finished painting done in his style. So that's why it's only half done. To the right of that, you see a sketch for the wonderful George Hallmark painting, which normally was out here, where we put the Rawson panel for the Rawson Commanders-in-Chief project. We're looking for a spot to get that back out, but the really fun thing to look at is to read that letter next to it about him working on that painting. Above that is a sketch for the Charlie Dye painting in the Cowboy Gallery, and to the right of that, Before White Man, Mike Polson. And then somebody was asking me about this saddle right here in front of me. This saddle was William Moyer's saddle. He was one of the early cowboy artists of America. His son is the one who did that sketch of the Indian in the red robe there. So I got a little familial thing going on here. All right, so from the painting on the left there by Teal Blake on around through to the cards painting over here, these are in the new section. So these are new pieces to the collection. You see 4 Curtis photographs here that were donated at the end of our Curtis exhibition that we did about 1.5 years ago. Lovely sculptures here by Susan Cleaver and T.D. Kelsey over there on the left. Some of you may know the largest single donation the museum's ever gotten in one piece of art is a W.R. Lee painting hanging downstairs across from the Lee that we own in the Enduring Traditions Gallery. It was donated by the Keogh family. Don Keogh was CEO of Coca-Cola for many years, and he collected this sculptor's work, and we're in the process of receiving 20 pieces by that artist from their estate. And we're going to wrap an exhibit around that sometime in the next 2 or 3 years to highlight his work. On the panel here in the center is a new artist to us. We found him on our member trip last year to Montana, Jeremy Winborg, and he's really taking Western art by storm in a lot of the shows that he's been in. This was a painting we had a chance to get, and so we jumped on it because don't know what's going to happen with his prices. He sold a piece at auction about that size in Montana, $53,000 not too long ago. And we didn't pay anywhere near that for that one. But love to have that in the collection. The 2 on the bottom, the bull and this one here, which might look familiar to some of you. You know who that is? John Coleman, that's right. It was painted by John Buxton, one of our friends and artists up in Pennsylvania who mostly does Eastern Indians and mountain men scenes. But he was visiting John Coleman's studio in Arizona, and John had this coat which once belonged to Slim Pickens, the actor. And so we got John to put the coat on, get the rifle and the hat, and pose for him. He took a bunch of pictures and turned that into this painting, and it's called a Slim Salute. So he's kind of doffing his hat, saluting Slim Pickens. And the one on the left, this one and the one on the left with the bull, both donated by a friend of ours in Greeley, Colorado, Shirley Holland. And that one's called Dust Devil. Could be devil in the dust, too. But Cleve Tyler here. This is James Boren. This is Nancy Boren's father. You know the great painting of the windmill, where the guy's climbing up on the windmill that we had in our portrait gallery, which we had to take down to make room for that painting project. But it's one of the more beloved pieces new to the collection. And this was her father. And when we had the CA 50 reunion here in 2015, his widow came here with Nancy and her husband. And she fell in love with the museum. And she called me one day and she said, I only have 2 major paintings of James's left that we kept. And the Cowboy Hall of Fame wants them. The Art Museum in Kerrville, Texas wants them. The Art Museum in Clifton, Texas wants them. But I think they need to be at the booth. So a Texas artist chose us over 3 Texas museums. I'll take that any day of the week. This is a new acquisition right here by Rox Corbett. A wonderful drawing that was in the Cowgirl Up exhibition, which they do every year in Wickenburg, Arizona. I was one of the judges, and we gave this best of show in drawing and water-soluble media. And I said, not only that, put it down for the booth. And so they were excited that it was going to the Booth Museum. She's one of the great pencil artists in our country. I mean, how do you show a golden horse in black and white? The title of this is something golden. Yeah, golden horse and spotted cattle. Now, if I told you you had to draw a golden horse with a pencil, but is there anything other than saying that that's a golden horse? She did it somehow. And then this is a fun little piece here out of a collection we got from Chicago a few years ago. Harding Alexander is the gentleman we deal with. And his friend was Frank Harding, who collected a lot of Western material, and we're in the process of taking that collection in as a donation. This is a piece by Tom Ryan, one of the great cowboy artists, and it was actually the collector's idea to put these cards in around the drawing in the frame and create kind of a mat out of the cards, and they're the old-timey cards. They're the ones they would have played with at this time. So that's kind of a cool thing. And y'all know I'm a sucker for a good title, right? This one's called In the Chips. You remember they spent 3 weeks trying to figure out who the president was? And the reason is these things were kind of complicated. I won't go through the whole thing, but you have to slide it in. You have to get it in the right spot. You have to line the holes up with the arrows. It's kind of dark in there. Not only that, it says you have 5 minutes. And look how many of these you got to punch out. So when they had one of these that was punched halfway, like this one, and I'll have Kent hold on to it and you come by and look at it. That's a hanging chad. See, it's still attached, but it's obvious that it's been punched out. And if you look real close, you'll see what they call a pregnant chad, where it's just dimpled. If you look real close at it, you can tell, yes, somebody pushed on it with something and made a dimple, but they didn't hit it hard enough to detach the piece. So if you remember 2 weeks, they were looking at these one by one with a magnifying glass, trying to determine, did they mean to vote for this person or didn't they? Did anybody ever see any coverage where they showed how you did this, or why they would be hanging, or why they might be pregnant? Anybody ever? Yeah, maybe 1 or 2. The hysteria was about pregnant and hanging chads, but they never got to the bottom of the story in most cases. So now you can see it for yourself. All right, so looking back at this wall, we've now entered the different section. The first piece on the left and then the fifth piece to your right, those are both carved leather. So they're hand-tooled carved leather, and then they apply pigments to them, or those turquoise stones are actually inset into the leather. So it's real turquoise. The second one from the right there, or second one starting on your left, the Tonto piece, that's a screen print demonstration that an artist did of how Andy Warhol created his screen print images. And so that was a live demo, and we got to have the piece from it. Next, there's a piece by B.C. Nowlin, who was here a couple of years ago. One of our sweet tea artists we brought in to talk to y'all, if you remember that. A really interesting piece there to the right of that by Ben Wright. Was owned by an artist friend of ours who needed to downsize and worked out a really nice deal with us for us to get it. The really cool thing is right to the left of the piece is a story that he wrote about this individual that's handwritten on the back of the painting. And so that's been transcribed onto that panel right there so you can read about it. Coming on around to this kind of greenish, kind of negative looking piece there. That was done by a Florida artist, and it's actually reverse painted on the glass and then mounted on aluminum. Gives a really kind of different effect. Nice Kevin Red Star we just had donated to the collection next to it. And then this skull piece has an interesting story behind it. The painting was painted by Clyde Burnett, who's the portrait artist who did Sam Booth's portrait that's downstairs in the Great Hall. And when his wife had passed, he was moving to an assisted living facility, and he was cleaning out his studio, and he said, I have a painting that the museum needs. I'd like for you to come get it. And when I got down there, he first gave me this skull. And I said, what am I supposed to do with this? And he said, well, you haven't seen the rest of the story. And we went around a corner, and this painting was there. And so he said his son had collected this skull on a trip out in the desert and had brought it home because he thought it was so cool looking and said, Dad, you got to paint this. And so his dad did what he told him. And then for whatever reason, the son didn't want the painting at his house and wanted it to come here to the museum. So we're grateful. Now remember that story, because at the end I'm going to tie it together with another part, okay? All right? Tom Ross did these woodblock prints. These are done by carving into a block of wood upside down and backwards, then inking the block and making an impression with a roller or a press. These were actually done for the 100th anniversary of the book, The Virginian. Anybody remember The Virginian? Was written by, help me Jim, Owen Wister, I forget that name. Owen Wister, it was really the first great Western novel. It also has been made into a movie and a TV show and all that kind of stuff. The original publication in 1903, I believe it was, had Charlie Russell prints in it. When they redid the 100th anniversary printing that the Buffalo Bill Museum published, they wanted to update the art and have it be a little more contemporary. They got Tom to do a cover painting, and then he did 6 or 8 of these wood blocks that went at the chapter headings. So he got to replace Charlie Russell. That's pretty cool, huh? Yeah. So if you get the 100th anniversary edition of that, you'll see this artwork in it. Next to it is a painting by Richard Mason, and it's untitled. Now, I heard one time they had a suggestion box at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, and somebody put a note in there that said they should have named the painting contest for all the untitled paintings in the museum. Because in modern and abstract art, a lot of paintings are untitled. And so they thought they should just go ahead and name them all. So what should we call this painting? Let's go ahead and name it. What? A fort? Okay. Looking out to the night sky. I like that. I kind of like the Jerry Seinfeld painting. It's a painting about nothing. But really it is about something. The more you look at it, the more you see.
Window to the world.
Window to the world, I like that. Or how about just the more you look at it, the more you see? I have to fess up. Our founders bought this painting maybe a dozen years ago. They'd been out to Santa Fe for a week going around to the galleries and seeing old friends and going to artist studios. And out of a whole week in Santa Fe, they brought me back this. And I said, really? A whole week in Santa Fe, and this is the one thing I get back from it? But it's grown on me and grown on me and grown on me. The more I look at it, the more I like it. And it really has become, I won't say a favorite, but it's definitely in the middle of the pack now, which is way up from where it was.
Narrow perspective.
Narrow perspective. Ah, I like that. How about blinders? Narrow perspective, yeah. This piece right here in the center is pretty abstract, but it is by Charlie Ringer, and he's a metal artist in Joliet, Montana, just west of Billings. It's in the Pryors, if you know where that is, where they have wild horse herds you can go and observe. And he does kind of kitschy things like I have at my house, a cowboy with a calf, and they're just on a pivot and they mount like this. Or he has an Indian with a buffalo, the Indian's chasing and they're just on mounts. And those are really cool, they're very accessible. I mean, they're $300, $400, $500 a piece. He has hundreds of different shapes that he's cut out and does those with. But he sells those to be able to finance doing projects like this, that if he were to tell you about it, I'm sure has some kind of meaning to him and the geometric nature of it and so on. But he's one of those absolutely slap crazy artists that I love being around because they could care less about the business side other than putting food on the table. They really are into their crazy projects. So he has a full-size flying saucer he's built out of found materials on his property. And he has all these aliens running around he's built out of other materials like mufflers and things. One of my favorite pieces of art I've ever seen was on the grounds of his house. He had 3 gas pumps around an oil barrel that had wooden flames coming up out of it. And the gas pumps had their nozzles stretched out with the pistol grips on the end over the fire like they were warming their hands. Now think about that. And think about the artist who's got to be crazy enough to come up with that. If you get a chance to visit his place, which is open to the public, they have a little gallery on the grounds where they sell the kind of kitschy pieces I was talking about. But you can wander around and see the other things. It's absolutely amazing. Drawing here by Terrell Gossion features an Apache violin, which we were able to talk him out of when we bought the drawing. Only took a check with a couple of zeros and a lot of talking, but we eventually got it. I got this in the mail, and I took it out, and it had the bow with it, and so I said, I wonder what it sounds like. So I got Richard Holmes, who was one of our docents at the time, who was a music teacher, and I said, Richard, can you play this? He said, sure. Picked it up. So we both said we must be doing something wrong. So we got on the internet and we ordered a CD of Apache violin music. We were so excited we got it in. We popped it in my computer, turned it on. So that's what it sounds like. Not very melodic. This painting is a real anomaly in the collection. It's by Thomas Kincaid. This is before the Painter of Light, before he became his own company, and before the stress of being his own company put him in an early grave. It's a pretty good painting, isn't it? Yeah. If he'd have stuck with that, who knows where he'd be today. This is another wonderfully different piece. This is embossed paper. So this is just made out of paper. And then it's got some color added to it to give these kind of landscape, gestural, mountains and hills kind of effect to it. Really a wonderful piece. And then I mentioned Dee Venzer was here today. This is her piece, The Grass Dancer. I think it's my favorite painting of hers, and so whenever I get a chance, I like to put it out. All right, and then we're on to stuff. So remember I told you about the belt collection? We've got a few. And of course, it's really about the buckles more than the belts themselves, although some of those are works of art as well. But here's more just cool stuff. This is Ron Riddick's palette when he was here for the CA50 and taught a workshop. Lisa's tried to throw that away at least 10 times. And I keep saying, no, I want to keep it. She said, what for? I said, well, for this. Same with Martin Greeley's palette up here above on the right. Look at the different kinds of barbed wire that there were. This is just a sampling. If you're interested in that, at the National Cowboy Museum, they have 1,600 strands of barbed wire. They have them in an open storage thing where they're in shelves, and you can pull the drawer out and you can see about 20 at a time. So that means there's, what, 80 drawers of that? I don't know about you, but 3 would be plenty for me. But there are people that'll sit there and pull out all 80 drawers. A new piece to the collection is the BS Guide to the Western Artist. Now, it's not what you think. The artist's name is Bonnie Shields. Pots and baskets that we're so lucky to have that have been donated in recent years. I did want to mention this skull up here that's painted. This is what's called a Comanche calling card. The Comanche would paint these, and normally it wouldn't have been a realistic painting like that. It would have been symbols or other things on them. And it basically was meant to say, stay away, no trespassing. They would put these out at the edge of their territory, and you knew you were taking your life in your own hands if you went past those. This one was created by Gary Worthen, who's a local artist here in New Harley. And when we very first were putting the museum together, he came and brought some work for me to look at. And at that point, I hadn't taken any art classes yet, so I was still pretty green. And I said, well, would you leave these here and let the founders look at them? They know more about it than I do. And he said, really? They would look at them? And I said, yeah, I'm sure they will. Just leave them here for a few days. When he came back to pick them up after they had looked at them and given them a little critique, he brought this as a present for the museum, and it's been hanging in my office ever since, till today. I mentioned the Georgia artist section, so that's the last part of the paintings here. These two and this one are by Jack Davis. How many UGA folks I got in the house? I don't hear any barking. Jack Davis did the game day program for probably 30, 40 years. He also did Mad Magazine covers. He did Playboy comics. But he also did a lot of cowboy and Indian and Civil War stuff. Some of you may remember we had a show 5 or 6 years ago of his material. And he gave us most of the cowboy and Civil War stuff that was in that show. Some of it in black and white, some of it in color. This one right here is my particular favorite from that collection. Those of you who can't see it, there's 2 horses down in the background. So the sheriff and the bad guy have both ridden their horses into the ground chasing. The sheriff's already obviously stalked him down on foot after that and beat the crap out of each other. The sheriff coming out on top. And now that he's ridden his horse in the ground, chased the guy down on foot, knocked the crap out of him, he's reached in his pocket and pulled out his Miranda card. And what it says at the bottom is, you have the right to remain silent. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. If that ain't funny, I don't know what is. David DeVary here in the center was a Chicago guy, became somewhat well known as a Western artist in Santa Fe. He went to his 50th high school reunion, and he saw his high school sweetheart again. They both had separate lives, were single at the time, got back together. She lives in Roswell, Sandy Springs area, so he now lives in Georgia. Now, how cool is that? At your 50th reunion, you meet the person you might have should have been with the whole time to begin with. Pretty neat. Right here on this wall, excuse me, this is David McKean, who's a wonderful colored pencil artist in Canton, Georgia. Unfortunately, he's not been able to make a living doing this and is doing another job in this on the side. But I think he's incredibly talented. I've been trying to help him get in some galleries, but take a close look at this when you get a chance. All right, so you remember the skull piece I was telling you about? And I went to go pick that up in Clyde's studio. Well, as I was getting ready to leave the studio, I saw this piece. And I said, Clyde, what are you doing with this one? And he said, I don't know. The kids have been here and they all got what they wanted, and this one was left over. I said, are you kidding me? Your kids don't want this piece? He said, well, none of them took it. This is a self-portrait of him looking at 6 different pieces of modern art. And it's called The Art Critic. I was like, well, can I have it? And he said, sure, you can have it. Take it. Take it. I ran with it. I just think it's so cool. I don't know his kids, but with our new emphasis on photography, we wanted to at least have a couple in here. You saw the Curtises over there. This is our good friend John Mariana. He has a black and white Yosemite scene downstairs in the by the glass elevator. This is one of his color scenes. And I think he's equally well at both, but I think his colors, the saturation that he puts into them, are pretty amazing. Rosina Santiago, who technically is not a Georgia artist now, but she lived here for a number of years. She's taught a lot at the Quinlan Art Center over in Gainesville. Now lives in Santa Fe, but has been a wonderful friend to the museum. Her piece here. And then the last painting I'll talk about is this piece by J.R. Willis, who is a Georgia artist who moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and was really quite an interesting character around town in Albuquerque, apparently. He normally wore a cape and had a big cigar. He was from Screven County, Georgia, and was active in Albuquerque in the 30s through the 50s, I believe, was his time period. But this is a very New Mexico scene for a Georgia artist to be doing. But, you know, I'm sure he couldn't do peach orchards and pecan trees and sell them in Albuquerque, so he quickly adapted to the local. And I have to give a shout out to our friends at the TIA collection. They were the ones who first turned us on to their artist. They have a couple of pieces in their collection by this artist and said, you know, you have a guy from Georgia in our collection. I said, really? Who's that? And I had never heard of this guy's name, so it was good to hear about. All right, and finishing up with sculpture. Here's another kinetic piece. This is a little more like what Charlie Ringer does normally, but his would be flat black. He just does them in the flat black original metal. This is an artist named Fred Prescott. Does a similar thing, but puts these wild colors on them, which adds a whole nother dimension. And I have one of these in my house, courtesy of our friends the Hunters, who donated it. And my wife bought it for me in the gala a couple of years ago. That has a couple of skiers with a sunset. So the sun goes like this, and the skiers go like this, and they never fall down. Just like the way I do it. So finishing up with sculpture, I told you we kind of had it set up open storage where you can see a lot of sculpture. And again, in this amount of space, we might put 2 to 3, 4 sculptures. But here you've got a couple of dozen to look at maybe. Some of the interesting pieces on that side, away from me here, is one by Vic Payne, who did the Eagle Catcher. It's a guy in a dentist chair. And again, I love a good title. This one's called Rather Fight Comanches. This piece right here in the center on the other side is by Mike Hamby. He's been here to the museum before, and he was an offensive lineman for the Buffalo Bills for 5 years, then got injured and decided he'd rather be a sculptor than get his head beat in. And he did some really nice work. J.M. Muir and Joe Beeler on the other side there. Some really nice pieces. This moose right here, this is also by T.D. Kelsey, and it's part of that T.D. Kelsey donation. If you get a chance, come around and look at it. It's really meant to be a life-size piece, which we actually have one of our members here in Cartersville who owns that in the life-size. And it's installed on the grounds, and it's meant to look like the moose has picked his head up out of the river with water running down the antlers and dripping down. And they have it installed that way where it pumps water up into the back of his neck and the water runs down off his antlers. So this is a maquette-size version of it. Really nice piece here by Glenna Goodacre, Spirit of the Southwest. Shows the gringo, the Native American, and the Hispanic traditions, 3 different people, cultures coming together in that part of the world. Another T.D. Kelsey here, these bookends. This is a wonderful George Carlson. George Carlson is quoted in the T. Allen Lawson exhibition about Tim Lawson's paintings. George has basically given up sculpture to paint full-time now and is doing some incredible work, but this is one of his great sculptures. This piece with the 3 musicians on horseback, That's by Dustin Payne. He's the son of Vic Payne, who did Eagle Catcher. And he's the third generation sculptor in that family. Vic's father, Ken, was also a great sculptor and gallery owner. And so keeping the tradition alive. Another Susan Cleaver piece. She also did the one with the Indian at the front there. Again, love a good title. This one is Fred Fellows' interpretation of the Charlie Russell painting A Bronx to Breakfast, if you know that piece. This one's called A Change in the Menu. It's knocking over the coffee pot and the Dutch ovens there. Nice Dave McGarry here. Gene Zesch, who's a comedian in wood and bronze. This is like a devastated ranch, and said, "This ranch has made me what I am today." Let's see. Deborah Fellows piece right under it, so you got Fred and Deborah right close to each other. One of my favorite Harry Jacksons that we didn't already have in the collection. We have a lot of Harry's work. This one is called Chief Washakie Sunset. And if you look closely at the colors, they're very kind of bright, saturated colors on the front side. And if you go around and look at the back, they're kind of dull, darker colors. And with the sun going down, you would have had the light hitting them on this side from the front and brought out all those colors on the back of being shadow. And when Harry did this piece, he said he finally had achieved what he'd been trying to accomplish with painting his bronzes over the last 20 years, which was to make a three-dimensional painting and show the way light happens at twilight or dawn. And so that's a really important piece there. Another Joe Beeler here. Another Harry Jackson right here, and that'll be the piece I'll end with. This is the skinny cowboy right here with his arm. Okay, I'll mention this one too, yep. This one's called Gunsel. If you go and you look downstairs at the mural Harry Jackson did of the range burial, you'll see that character in the painting and in the sculpture. And when he first did those sculptures, one of the things he quickly realized from a business standpoint was when he does these assemblages of figures, he could pull individual figures out and make molds of those and sell those figures individually and have a title for each figure. The same way the people who do the big paper sculpture that's in the new wing, they do the same thing. They do that huge assemblage with all those figures in paper, and people can't afford to buy the whole thing, but they sell each figure in it separately. And that's kind of what Jackson started doing with his sculptures. So if you look closely, you'll find this as a figure study. Okay, the lady asked me to talk this piece right here. This is Tim Nicola, Native American artist. I'm not sure his tribal affiliation. The last time I heard, he was living in Maine. And if he's from there, that would be Penobscot or Micmac Indians, something of that sort. This is definitely a southwestern piece, though. And Tim was a student of Doug Hyde at IAIA, the Institute of American Indian Art in Santa Fe, which probably more than half of the important Native American artists that we know of and collect went to that school. Alan Hauser was the original sculpture instructor. Doug Hyde took over from him. So over a 35-year period, those were the two sculpture instructors at that school. And they've spawned generations of great Native sculptors, Tim being one of them. All right, anybody any questions?
Seth, that was a great presentation.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for being here.